The morning air still clung to the last chill of night as he stepped down from the delivery van, boots splashing gently into a shallow puddle on the pavement. The city was barely awake, but the restaurant ahead already glowed from within, tall glass windows, warm interior lights, the faint silhouette of white jackets moving with mechanical grace. He carried the box in both arms, pressing it close to his chest. It was heavier than it looked, not because of the contents, fresh baguettes, handmade aioli, organic cured meats, but because of what it represented. The weight of being unseen. The weight of being mistaken. Again. His clothes were nondescript, a faded hoodie, work pants with creases from real labor, hands worn from years of lifting more than just promises. His beard was short, tidy, but still rough enough for assumptions. The kind of man people never apologized to. As he approached the front entrance, the host appeared, young, confident, tailored shirt hugging a gym-trained frame. He looked once at the box, once at the man, then tilted his chin toward the alley without hesitation. The message was clear. Not welcome through the glass. He didn't argue. He never did. He turned, walked around the side of the building, the box shifting slightly with each step. The alley was narrower than he remembered, lined with broken pallets, damp cardboard, the sour smell of fermentation and oil. A kitchen porter smoked beside the back door, earbuds in, hoodie up, not even looking up as he passed. Inside the kitchen, steam clouded the air. Stainless steel counters gleamed. The sounds were sharp and fast, knives hitting boards, pans clashing on burners, tickets printing like confetti. He placed the box on the prep station. A line cook nodded without recognition, slicing basil with a speed that made the gesture mechanical. He stepped back out just as silently as he had entered. The rain had started again, soft but persistent. He returned to the van, wiped his hands on a cloth that had seen too many shifts, and stared at the reflection in the window for a moment. A tired man. A man no one recognized. Not the kind who would be remembered when wine glasses clinked and menus were changed. But the restaurant had his money in its walls, his sweat in its foundation, his vision in its mission statement, and his name, though omitted from the signage, was embedded in the ownership papers, second only to the CEO himself. He had chosen this anonymity. On purpose. He wanted to see what the business had become, not through investor reports or polished slides, but through the way people treated those who brought the food in its sunrise. That was the test. Always had been. Later that night, the scene would be different. The front door would open with ceremony. The CEO would arrive with entourage, clients in tow. The sommelier would glide from table to table. The host, the same one who had gestured toward the alley, would smile a perfect, rehearsed smile. And when he walked in, dressed not in a hoodie but in tailored wool, guided by the CEO himself, hand placed warmly on his shoulder, the room would shift. Eyes would widen. The host would blink, hesitate, swallow dry air. He wouldn't say a word. He wouldn't have to. Because there is a difference between owning the table and being allowed to serve at it. And sometimes the quietest man in the room is the one who paid for the chairs. The restaurant glistened by nightfall. Outside, the sidewalk shimmered with reflected light from gold signage and flickering lanterns, casting long shadows that stretched like whispers from another life. Inside, the atmosphere shifted, candles were lit, menus were rolled out like scripts, and wine bottles exhaled centuries of patience as corks gave way with quiet pops. He arrived just after 8. Gone was the hoodie, the van, the stained delivery box. In their place, a navy wool coat tailored to fall just above polished shoes, a dark open-collar shirt that bore no logo, no brand. His hair was combed back cleanly, beard trimmed tight. The face remained the same, worn by time, hardened by effort, but now the details were sharpened into something undeniable. The CEO met him at the curb. It was a brief handshake, quiet and discreet, but it radiated weight. The kind that came from numbers most of the staff would never see, from decisions that shaped leases, menus, staffing levels, and expansion markets. They entered through the front. The same glass doors where, just hours earlier, he'd been dismissed without a second glance. This time, everyone looked. The host stood frozen for a moment, confusion flickering across his polished expression like a system error. His hand instinctively reached for the reservation tablet before he realized who was standing before him, not a client, not a critic, not a celebrity. Someone worse. An owner. The CEO leaned in to speak softly, and the host's cheeks flushed beneath the ambient lighting. He stepped back, holding out an arm toward the main dining area like a servant opening a palace gate. They walked past tables filled with laughter, with deals being toasted and anniversaries being faked. Waitstaff maneuvered smoothly through the dining room, rehearsed smiles fixed in place. He recognized some of them. Names he had seen on shift rosters when he had asked for staffing breakdowns 2 quarters ago. Faces he had passed in silence as a driver. Faces that had never looked back. Now they looked. They were led to a private table near the kitchen window, an intentional choice. It wasn't seclusion he wanted. It was sidelines. He wanted to see how things moved. How the kitchen hummed, how the dishes were plated, how the team behind the curtain breathed in pressure and exhaled perfection. Dinner was served with precision. But he barely touched the food. He watched. The CEO made small talk. Projections. Upcoming brand partnerships. A pop-up concept in Miami. Numbers flowed like wine, but he only nodded sparingly. His thoughts weren't on the future. They were on the present. On the dishwasher working through his break to cover someone else's station. On the prep cook with eyes sagging from back-to-back doubles. On the server who smiled at the table of financiers but winced when they left her no tip. He excused himself quietly and left the table. He walked down the corridor toward the employee hallway, not stopping when he passed the restroom or when he passed the kitchen door. He found the service alley again. The same concrete space he had entered that morning. There, near the garbage bins, the same porter from before smoked another cigarette, headphones still in. He looked up this time. Recognition dawned. Not just of the face, but of the switch, the hoodie replaced by cashmere, the weary gait replaced with quiet authority. Still, he didn't speak. He just nodded once. And the porter, uncertain but instinctively respectful, nodded back. The founder stepped back inside through the rear door, walked to the kitchen line, and stood near the prep counter. The head chef noticed him first. They had met before, long ago, before the brand, before the investors, back when stainless steel had more rust and less polish. The chef motioned for him to step around. He did. He picked up a towel, wiped the counter, and began to plate. No one stopped him. Because respect, real respect, doesn't wear a badge. It moves like muscle memory. It comes from being able to do the thing, not just pay for it. He finished plating one dish, then another. No flair. Just precision. The line cook beside him whispered something to the expo runner, who turned and stared, wide-eyed. It spread through the kitchen like a ripple. The man who came through the alley in the morning was now expediting the orders of the night. Not as a performance. As a reminder. Because restaurants, like people, often forget where they come from. And sometimes the best way to teach them is to enter through the back door first. The morning after was colder than expected. A low fog crept through the streets, muting the edges of traffic and dampening the sound of distant deliveries. But inside the restaurant, warmth built steadily, not from the ovens, but from murmurs. Everyone was talking. About the night before. About the man in the suit who had plated dishes with surgeon-like focus. About the delivery guy who, without raising his voice, took over the pass and called out table numbers with perfect cadence. About the quiet man who, after working side by side with the kitchen crew, had walked out the front door with the owner beside him. The staff had seen enough consultants breeze through with vague feedback and expensive shoes. This had been different. There had been no theatrics, no clipboard, just hands that worked and eyes that noticed. Back in the office above the dining room, the CEO was still processing the shift. He sat at his desk, reviewing financial reports, but the columns and numbers couldn't distract him from what had changed. The power balance had been disrupted, not through confrontation, but through demonstration. And now everyone knew. The investor wasn't silent. He was watching, and he was present. Downstairs, the same host from yesterday straightened his tie with nervous fingers. He rehearsed greetings in his mind, questioning every assumption he'd made about the faces that came through the door. The air of certainty had drained from his posture, replaced with something more fragile. Awareness. By mid-afternoon, the investor returned. No announcement, no entourage, no formality, just presence. He didn't go to the main dining area. He went through the alley again. Not because he had to, because he chose to. He walked past the same grease bins, past the same chipped bricks, through the back door that slammed slightly off-center. The kitchen stopped for a second, not in fear, but in recognition. And this time they greeted him. A nod from the Sioux, a wave from prep. Even the dishwasher, usually invisible, raised a hand mid-load. He didn't go to the office. He asked for the staff break room. They led him there, a cramped space barely big enough for 6 chairs and a scratched microwave. He sat down, opened his notebook, and began asking questions. What was working? What wasn't? What did they need? At first, they hesitated. But his silence invited honesty. Slowly, the answers came. The fryer was too close to the cold prep station. The supply schedule left gaps in coverage. The late shift was understaffed. The tip distribution policy, changed 6 months ago, was demoralizing. He listened to every word. He didn't defend. He didn't explain. He just wrote. Later that week, changes began. Not grand gestures, quiet ones. A new fryer station was installed, repositioned based on the prep cook's suggestions. Schedules were adjusted to include a dedicated closer, relieving the strain on night staff. An anonymous suggestions box appeared near the locker room, not for optics but because he actually read every note. The biggest change came in the form of a meeting. Mandatory, but not for the staff. For the management. Held in the dining room after hours, chairs rearranged into a wide circle. No PowerPoint, no charts. Just one question written on a whiteboard. If the person sweeping the floor can't afford to eat here, are we building something worth being proud of? Some squirmed. Some scoffed. But no one answered. Not at first. Because they knew who had written the question. And they knew what he had done to earn the right to ask it. He didn't scold them. He didn't shame them. He just stood there, holding the silence, letting it stretch until someone, a junior manager newly promoted, finally spoke. And once the silence was broken, the rebuilding could begin. The restaurant didn't need rebranding. It needed remembering of who it was built for, of who had built it, of the man who once carried deliveries through the back. Not because he had to, but because the front wasn't ready yet. The restaurant no longer whispered when he walked in. Now it adjusted. The staff straightened without stiffening. The kitchen prepped with cleaner lines and fewer shortcuts. The music wasn't louder, it was more thoughtful. Everything felt intentional. Not afraid, not forced, just aware. Aware that someone in the building understood the weight of the work. He came more often now. Not as an owner flaunting power, not as an investor counting returns, but as a man revisiting something he'd once loved and lost. He sat at the back during lunch rushes, watching the movement of service like choreography. He noticed the rhythm, the timing of plates, the sway of servers avoiding collision, the way a single delay in expo threw off everything behind it. These weren't details most investors saw. But he had worked the line before. He had broken down crates and cleaned walk-ins. He had scrubbed stove hoods until dawn. The building hadn't changed, but its soul had shifted. The host, once dismissive, now greeted every delivery driver with clarity. The back door remained in use, but only for utility, never for status. Guests no longer looked confused when a dishwasher passed through the main corridor. And no one referred to the help as background anymore. There was a new board near the staff lockers, bigger than the old corkboard, mounted in a frame. At the top, it read, "What it feels like to be seen." Below, handwritten notes from staff, stories, memories, one-line reflections. Some funny, some sharp. All honest. He read them all. And once a week, he added his own. Never signed. Just written in a different pen. This week's note was simple. Your station is cleaner than your resume. That matters more than you know. On Fridays after close, he walked the kitchen alone. No audience. No fanfare. He checked the reach-in temps. Tasted the sauce. Sat by the prep table in the dark, the smell of onions and steel still clinging to the air. It calmed him in a way no quarterly report ever could. Once, a young line cook forgot he was still there, came in to clean a spill, and froze when he saw him. The investor only handed him a towel, then cleaned alongside him. Word spread. Again. But the legend didn't grow through exaggeration, it grew through proximity. He wasn't a myth anymore. He was real. And because of that, so was the sense that maybe, just maybe, the hierarchy didn't have to flatten people to work. Upstairs, the executive team had shifted. Not because of speeches, but because of subtraction. Two partners had quietly stepped down. They'd seen where it was going, not toward IPO dreams, but toward infrastructure. Not toward ego, but ecosystem. The kind of culture that didn't just retain talent, it raised it. The investor made no public announcements. He made lunch. Once a month, he cooked. For staff only. No reservations. No plating tongs. Just food served on stainless trays. Family style. He listened to them talk between bites. The conversations they thought no one ever noticed. Rent increases. Sick parents. The exhaustion of pretending to always be okay in front of customers. He never interrupted. He just made sure there were seconds. Later, the general manager pulled him aside. She asked what the endgame was. He looked around the restaurant at the lights dimming for the night, at the dishwasher waving goodbye, at the barback wiping down the last wine glass. And he nodded once. This was it. The restaurant wasn't a brand anymore. It was a place again. A place where everyone knew the front door was open to those who built it, not just those who booked it. Autumn crept in slowly, and with it came a new kind of rhythm. The city's edge dulled under amber tones, and the restaurant's windows glowed warmly against the early dusk. Inside, the tempo of service was the same, steady, sharp, precise, but something deeper had settled beneath the routines: trust. It was no longer about who held titles. It was about who showed up. The investor still came through the back some days, out of habit or principle, no one really knew. On others, he walked through the front like any other guest. Either way, no one corrected him. The staff didn't straighten or adjust anymore. They simply nodded, greeted, and continued. His presence no longer disrupted the flow. It was part of it. One night, a dishwasher called in sick. Another missed the shift completely. A snowball effect began, dishes backed up, line cooks scrambled, floor managers grew tense. The kind of night where cracks turned into breaks. He didn't hesitate. He rolled up his sleeves, slipped on the backup apron near the dish pit, and got to work. One by one, the pans disappeared from the tower. Plates returned to the line. Water splashed up his forearms and steam curled from racks stacked high with silverware. He didn't speak. He just moved. At some point, the floor manager stepped in to say thank you. He only nodded and kept scrubbing. The kitchen didn't miss a beat that night. But something else shifted. They saw him differently after that. Not with awe, with belonging. Not because he had filled a gap, but because he had done it without hesitation. Because he didn't watch them struggle and write a memo. He stepped into the water, shoulder to shoulder, and made sure the team made it through. The next day, a photo appeared on the staff board. Not from a phone. From the security cam above the dish pit. Grainy. Black and white. Him at the sink, back slightly bent, gloves soaked. No caption. None needed. The photo stayed. And people began adding their own snapshots of each other in motion. A server laughing while covered in spilled espresso. A line cook sleeping on a crate between shifts. A manager carrying a broken chair up 3 flights. It became something more than a wall. It became a memory. A living record of effort no one clapped for, but everyone relied on. And through all of it, the investor remained quiet. But not distant. He took fewer calls from the venture side now. Some of them didn't like the direction. They had expected scale. Franchising. Licensing. Exit plans. He had different goals. One afternoon, a venture partner flew in from the coast, demanding a sit-down. He arrived in a driver's car, wore a blazer with 3 logos stitched into the cuff, and asked for the decision-maker. Staff pointed him to the dining room where the investor sat in an apron, reviewing invoices with the purchasing lead. The partner sat. Started his pitch. Charts. Slides. Expansion plans. The investor listened. Then stood. He didn't say no. He just handed the man a sealed envelope, a formal buyout offer. Fair. Immediate. Clean. The man blinked, confused. The investor pointed to the server nearby, the one who'd just returned from a funeral and still clocked in. Then to the prep cook with a healing burn. Then to the dishwasher missing 2 fingers who never asked for pity. Then he walked back to the kitchen. The investor didn't reject money. He just refused to trade people for it. That night, he stayed after close. Sat at the bar, drink untouched, eyes fixed on the floor where thousands of shoes had passed. The room was quiet, but not empty. It was full of echoes of plates, of laughter, of labor. He didn't need applause. He needed integrity. And now, after everything, the restaurant finally reflected that. Not because he made it new, but because he made it honest. It began like any ordinary morning. The city stretched awake beneath a low sun, fog warming into vapor as shop doors creaked open and crosswalks filled with familiar patterns. But inside the restaurant, the light was different. Not in intensity, in intention. There was a ceremony planned, but no one wore tuxedos. No red carpet. No speeches. Just a day marked on the calendar in quiet ink, 10 years since opening. No press releases. No influencers. No artificial hype. Instead, the entire staff was called in early. Paid in full. Overtime guaranteed. Not to cook, not to serve. But to sit. Together. Tables were arranged in long communal rows. The servers and dishwashers sat beside the executive chef. The prep cooks beside the general manager. Aprons hung untouched. No tickets printed. No doors open to the public. And at the head of the room, in front of nothing but a wall of handwritten notes, stood the man who had walked through the back door a year before. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't clear his throat. He simply looked at the faces before him, tired, honest, complicated, and nodded. Then he stepped aside. One by one, others stood. The dishwasher told the story of her first day, how she didn't speak English, but someone had shown her how to stack trays with balance and grace. The host recounted the night he turned away the wrong person and how it changed everything he thought he knew about appearances. The sous chef spoke of a panic attack he once had in the walk-in fridge and how someone had stood outside the door until he was ready to come back out. No one was performing. They were remembering. And through it all, the investor sat silently. Not out of modesty. Out of fulfillment. Because the building no longer needed correction. It breathed with its own kind of conscience now, shaped by 1,000 small acts that no spreadsheet would ever recognize. After the gathering ended, service resumed. The doors opened. Guests returned. Dishes were plated. Drinks poured. But under the rhythm of dinner rush, something else happened. A man in a suit, unfamiliar to the staff, entered through the front. He had a camera crew. He had questions. He wanted to speak to the owner. He had heard the story, the delivery guy who turned out to be the one who owned the place. He wanted the origin story. The plot twist. The investor didn't appear. He sent someone else. A line cook. She explained that the owner didn't like being the center of things. That he believed places like this weren't built by one person. That maybe the story was better told by the ones who were still carrying it. The man in the suit didn't understand. But the staff did. Later that night, the investor stayed behind, as always. He wiped down the counter. Folded a few towels. Walked into the walk-in, checked inventory levels. Left a sticky note on the tomato tray, getting soft, swap first. Then he walked outside. The city was quieter now. He crossed the alley one more time. The same one he had been redirected to. The same one that still smelled like oil and heat and cigarette smoke. He stood there for a while, watching the soft light spill from the kitchen. No one joined him. No one had to. Because he had changed the entire place without raising his voice, without flexing his money, without stepping on anyone to climb higher. He had simply walked through the back and built the front from the inside out.